Welcome back to Sabah al-Muslim on Radio Islam International. It's just gone 14 minutes to 9 Central African time. Just days ago, British political commentator Sami Hamdi returned home after nearly 2 weeks in US immigration detention, a period which he describes as political punishment dressed up as immigration law. Now, while being held, he says he was denied basic medical treatment, kept in inhumane conditions, and publicly portrayed as a terrorist sympathizer, accusations that never featured in court. On this very program, we spoke to his father while he was detained, as families and supporters were scrambling for answers. Since his release, Sami has been very clear. This was never about a visa, it was about shutting down dissent. He has framed his case not as a personal ordeal, but as a warning about the shrinking space for Palestinian activism, free speech, and political critique in the United States and beyond. So, we are joined on the line from the UK this morning by Sami Hamdi. Sami, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Radio Islam International.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me.
Well, many of our listeners out here in South Africa were making fervent dua and supplication for you. You were in our country not too long ago. You've spoken since your release about some aspects of your experience and some of the key thoughts that you thought flowed from it. Based on your experience, Sami, what does this incident and this ordeal for you mean for the future of Palestinian activism, especially in the United States and throughout the globe? And what lessons do you think activists need to be taking from what happened to you?
I think that one of the things that's very important is that it's important that we see the situation for what it is, not what we think it is. And what I mean by that is that it is abundantly clear that what happened to me is not a reflection that the Israeli lobby is strong or that the Israeli lobby is flying high, but rather the opposite. That the shift in public opinion that's taking place in the US, the shift in global public opinion that's taking place, the polls that show that now around the world, Israel no longer has the support that it once had, and that the sympathy for the Palestinian cause is growing rapidly. In the words of the former head of the ADL, Jonathan Greenblatt, who said that we've lost an entire generation of Americans. I think what happened to me was a hysterical lashing out on the part of this Israeli lobby, and that given that they were unable to pass an anti-boycott bill in Congress, despite buying TikTok for $50 billion, they have been unable to stem the flow of information and prevent the American public from seeing that information. Despite the fact that they've bought CBS and appointed Barry Weiss at the top to control the flow of information to the Americans, Americans continue to see the reality of what's unfolding. Despite the money being spent on lobbying, Donald Trump has forced them into a tenuous ceasefire in Gaza, and now there is a battle and wrestling match between Erdogan and between the Israelis over how this international force will be in Gaza. My point is that when you look at all of these particular dynamics, the aim was to strike fear in the hearts of anybody who talks about Palestine. But I actually argue that not only did they fail miserably, but rather that attack that took place was from a place of fear, in that they are the ones who are concerned that the Israeli lobby is collapsing in America. When you look at Mamdani's win in New York, where you have a new generation of Americans going to vote for Mamdani because they believe he's the America First candidate, and they don't want to vote for Israel First candidates like Cuomo and Eric Adams. When you look at how this America First versus Israel First phenomenon is emerging in the US, whereby now it's transcending party lines. It's no longer Democrat and Republican anymore. You had Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Republican, celebrating a left-wing socialist like Mamdani because she celebrated him for putting New York first, and she condemned the Republican candidate for putting Israel first. We're seeing that it's transcending party lines in this regard. And that's why I think that this story was more than just Sami Hamdi. The story was not about me. The story was part of a wider story in which, for the first time in 78 years, as a result of social media and a number of other factors, we're now seeing that the Israeli lobby believes itself today to be in an existential crisis, where you have members or candidates for Congress coming out openly and saying that they will not take AIPAC money because they are worried that if they take AIPAC money, then they will be punished by the American people. We're seeing all these various different changes take place. And that's why, to go back to your question, when you say, well, what happens now? What's the message they're trying to send, and the like? What I would say is they are so overwhelmingly terrified of the da'wah of truth They're terrified of the da'wah of righteousness. They're terrified of the da'wah of the Palestinians and all who stand with those Palestinians. They're trying to silence that da'wah, but instead it's roaring across the world, and there seems to be nothing that this fascist Israeli lobby can do about it.
Do you believe, Sami, that your detention was an isolated case of abuse of power? Or is this now the beginning of a new model of silencing pro-Palestinian voices because of this realization that you spoke about earlier on, that they're losing the war on the narrative?
Well, if you allow me to expand the timeline just a little bit to answer the question, I think that it's important to remember that the first targets were actually US citizens when they went after the likes of Mehdi Hassan, suggesting somehow they would reverse his naturalization. They went after American citizens, American organizations such as American Muslims for Palestine. You'll remember that the Attorney General in Michigan tried to drag the American Muslims for Palestine through the courts. And the judge, instead of looking at the case, the judge said, I've heard news that there is somehow some undue influence at the Attorney General's office, that this case was brought under pressure from a foreign government. I need to investigate this first before I look at the case. And the Attorney General in Michigan threw out the case, canceled the case for fear that an investigation would be opened. In Nevada, American Muslims for Palestine, American citizens, an American organization was brought before the courts because students at a university campus said that they felt uncomfortable when Palestinians and those who support them were talking about the genocide that was taking place. The judge looked at the case and said, and you can find this in court documents, that am I to understand that this is a case that's been brought before me because an American expressed an opinion and another America got offended? We're the land of freedom of speech. Get out of here. So they failed with regards to the American citizens. So they decided to go after green cards. So they went after Mahmoud Khalil. They said, let's go after, if we can't get you a citizen, let's go after green card holder. We need to strike fear. We need to stop these people talking. We need to stop this Palestinian activism. We need to stop them talking to the American people because the Americans are listening. Almost if you want to strike the parallel, they're listening to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam in Quraysh. They are listening to Mus'ab ibn Umayr radhiallahu anhu in Medina. We need to stop people from connecting with them because when these people are talking, the people are becoming convinced. So we need to strike fear. Let's go grab Mahmoud Khalil. They grabbed Mahmoud Khalil. They sent him to Louisiana, but a judge in New Jersey said that it was a violation of his freedom of speech and he could not be deported. Then they tried to appeal. And again, the judge said that he could not be deported. And now Mahmoud Khalil, despite the ongoing situation with him, has not been deported because they're struggling to do so. When they failed to go after that green card, they said, oh my goodness, we can't go after citizens. We're struggling to go after green card holders. Let's go after student visas. They went after Rumaysa Ozturk for an op-ed that she wrote regarding that it is not in America's interest to support the Israelis. And ICE came and picked her up and they detained her because of this op-ed article that she wrote. But when it got in front of the court ruled that it was a transgression against freedom of speech. Rumaysa was released. So they went after another student visa, Mohsen Mahdawi of Columbia University. And the same thing happened again. It got in front of the court. Mohsen Mahdawi was released. And it's in this context that I think that they turned around and said, okay, citizens, we can't get them. Green card holders, we're struggling. Student visas, but we need something because this tide is irresistible. It keeps going. How can we stop the Americans from hearing this advocacy? We need to strike fear. We need to tell people there is a price to pay if you stand for the truth of the Palestinians. Let's go after a short-term visitor visa. There is somebody called Sami Hamdi. He has a B1, B2 short-term business visa that lasts for 10 years until 2028. Let's take a small scalp and go after him. Maybe that will produce that ripple effect. It's in this context that I believe that I was targeted. And it's in this context that I believe that they failed miserably because 2 federal judges in those 18 days came out and said that there are clear signs of an infringement on his right to freedom of speech. The government tried to say that they had no jurisdiction to look at my case. The judge responded within an hour saying, we do have jurisdiction and we're concerned about what's happening. That made the government lawyer then contact my lawyers. You mentioned about what they were saying publicly, and you also alluded correctly that they didn't say it privately. Not only did they not say it privately, but when they approached my lawyers, the tone in which they approached my lawyers was, listen, can we just clear this up? Can we just, make this go away? We won't challenge you. We won't deport you. We won't remove you. Just if you want to go home, we'll let you go home unchallenged, and just apply for a visa at a later date and welcome and come back to America afterwards.
Sami, you correctly mentioned that this is not about you, it's about the greater cause. But just to conclude in the minute or so that we have left, on a human level, how did you keep yourself focused and motivated whilst in detention? And what would you say are kind of the life lessons perhaps that you've learned from this entire experience?
There is a beautiful phrase that Ibrahim alayhi salam uses in the Quran, سأستغفر لك ربي إنه كان بي حفيا, that Allah always looks after me. Musa alayhi salam said, إن معي ربي سيهدين. Allah is with me, He will always guide me. I think that when I compare what happened to me, I mean, as I lay there on the bed on the first day, I always thought I'd be terrified if this thing happened. In fact, I was a bit concerned that I wasn't scared enough about what was unfolding. But I'm a person who believes in that divinity. I believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's intervention. I believe that it was sakina. There are many stories I could tell in this regard. But what I will say more than anything else is nothing that happened to me compares to that brutal genocide that's taking place in Palestine. Nothing compares to Sidra's legs being blown off. Nothing compares to Hind Rajab having 320 bullets shot at her. Nothing compares to Reem, Ruh al-Ruh, that 6-year-old that her grandfather called her soul of my soul, where she was killed by the Israelis for committing no crime whatsoever and punished to this sort of, collective punishment in which women are being slaughtered, ethnic cleansing is taking place, all because of some 3,000-year-old prophecy that the Israelis claim from a God that they do not even believe in. And I think that when you compare that, the reality is that I think that for all what happened, Allah continued to be hafiya with me. And I think that I don't dare complain about that situation, because when I compare what they're going through, it doesn't compare. And if anything, if I'm to be blunt and to finish on this particular point, there is a joy to know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed us to hurt that Israeli lobby. There's a joy to know that the voice was so loud that they had to come after and try to silence me and others, and Mahmoud Khalil and Rumaysa Noise others. There's a joy to know that despite their material superiority, it's not providing them any comfort, it's not providing them any ease, and that the power that we have, that Allah has already given us, is sufficient for us to render all of the material superiority irrelevant.
Sami, shukran so much for your time and for chatting to us. May Allah reward you for your patience and for the difficulty you went through. And may Allah strengthen you in your activism in the quest for justice for the Palestinian people and all those who are suffering occupation and oppression. Shukran.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much for having me.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Well, on that note, we close the program for today. After the break, you've got